Hey everyone, just a brief summary of what we're going to be doing in lab on Friday. I expect that lab on Friday will be a lot of you letting the students work through things because largely this file is a review. Just so you know what's happened in class, just an update. I wanted to tell you that I went over conditional formatting in lecture hall today. So conditional formatting should be easier to talk about. There's only one conditional formatting in the lab file that we're working on today, but students should have a pretty good grasp if they were in lecture on how to do conditional formatting. Not that it's difficult, but I ask kind of difficult questions with it sometimes. So wanted to point out to you that I have done that already, so it should be pretty brief when you're having to go over it. You'll notice when you go through this file that there is one tab in here that is a straight copy paste from last week when we did lab. So we'll talk about that in a second. But let's walk through the file real quick and I'll show you what I want you to be covering in lab on Friday. I also will send out some PowerPoint slides that I'd like for you to flip through at the beginning of class. They are exam rules and things of that nature because we do have a two-part exam coming up next week. So I do want the students to understand fully what the rules are, so I'll go ahead and send those out so you won't have to make those, but don't expect them until probably tomorrow evening. So it'll just be something basic and we'll talk about those rules. I'm happy to go over them with you, or you guys can go over them. They're not difficult. If the students have questions, they can ask me. It's basically make sure you turn it in on time in the exams next week. So let's get started. One of the things that we're learning about in Chapter 4 are data tables. The students get really confused with data tables because they think everything inside Excel is a data table. And as you probably know, it isn't. We call these tables inadvertently because we've been raised our whole life on computers to think of data that's formatted this way as a table. But to Excel, this isn't a data table until we turn it into a data table object. An object is a computer word for something that contains instructions. So that's just the basic definition. But in this tab, we're going to turn this data in column A through E into a data table. There are several ways to do it. Pearson teaches them a different way than we're going to teach them. So we'll just walk through it really quickly the way that I want you all to show them how to do it. Again, we're not showing them the same way that Pearson shows them because they've already had that set of instructions. So we'll go a different way. So any way that they want to get to it is fine. There's a variety of ways to do it, but we're going to do it this way. So if you will click anywhere inside this data, I think the data goes column A through E, and let's see how far down it goes, all the way to row 49. So it's not a ton of data. It's data about 4 different room types and over a 2-year period, so it's about revenue. But there's not a lot of data here. Remember to remind them that on the exam, they're going to have a lot more data than this, so this formatting it as a table and doing totals and averages is something that's really beneficial. So for this example, we're going to click up here in the Home tab in this group here, and we're going to click on Format as Table. I've instructed them to make it somehow blue, I think, somewhere in here. Format as something blue, so pick anything in this blue column here. It doesn't matter to me which one. I really couldn't care less. So I'll just select, let's see, I'll just select this one. And it says, where's the data for your table? Is this where it is? Excel by default will select all the contiguous data, meaning all the data that's touching, and format it into a data table. There's a checkbox there that says my table has headers. They need to leave that checked because their data has headers. If their data didn't have headers, Excel will insert headers for them if they uncheck that box. But this particular data already has them, so we're just going to say OK and accept the defaults and let it format this as a table. You'll notice now I'm clicked inside this table and I have a new tab up here on my ribbon. I have a table tab. Well, the table tab will allow me to do a lot of things to the data table itself. The instructions asked us to use the details to create a data table, format the data table in a blue style, rename the table to rooms 1516, and include a totals row. So we've already done this part of the directions. Now we need to rename the table. What I mean by rename the table is you'll notice you guys know that you can rename a range. You've probably talked about this. You probably know that you can name a range in Excel. We haven't actually covered this necessarily out loud in lab, and in lecture we will at some point talk about how you can name things, but we're going to name a table. It's going to be our first experience with it. So the way that you know the name of this table, if you were going to try to refer to it, let's say in a VLOOKUP, and you wanted to look up something in this table, you would say cell A1 down to E49. That's how you would reference it. Well, if you name the table, then you can refer to it by its name in formulas. So that's why we're going to do this. We're going to call this table 2 rooms 1516. And so that's how we would refer to it. The students know, after today, that they shouldn't include spaces when they're naming things, as Excel will not accept it a lot of times. So all you have to do to name this table is type 2 rooms 1516, hit enter, and it will automatically rename your table. Now you'll notice if you click on any cell that's not in the table, your home address will say you're in Q12. If you click inside the table and you open the table tab back up, it'll tell you the table name that you're inside of, 2 rooms 1516, which will correspond to that data range there. The last thing it asks for is for us to include a totals row. Sometimes students will panic when they're doing this data table and they'll click off of it and the table tab disappears. All you have to do to get the table tab back, it's just like a pivot table, just click back in it, it'll come back. You click back inside the table and you're going to insert this totals row by checking this box right here. When I insert the totals row, my Mac automatically takes me to the bottom of the table and displays the total as 5,136,639. That's all well and good. I can click on this drop down box and realize that the table is summing it for me. I can also ask it to average the data. I can ask it to count the number of records. I can ask it to count the numbers. That's count A. I can ask it to find me the maximum value. I can ask it to find the minimum value. I want you to have them leave it as the average. So that's all that I want them to do to the data table. Just make it a data table, rename it, and put an average total on it. The next tab, you won't go over with them, other than to say this is exactly the same VLOOKUP that we did last week in lab, except for one very important detail. The values that they need to look up are no longer on this tab. You'll remember last week they were somewhere like here and here, but last week we were just showing them how to do a VLOOKUP. This week, one of our objectives is to have them manage multiple worksheets at the same time. So the great way to do this is to use the lookup values on the other tab. I'm assuming that you guys can do this. If you have problems, please let me know, but I'm not going to waste time in this video telling you how to do the lookups. The actual answers should be the same as they were from last week, so hopefully you can figure those out. That's all that there is to do with the lookup and the lookup values tab. The payment tab, on the other hand, is a refresher to what we did a couple of weeks ago. I like payment functions. They show up everywhere, and so we're going to do a lot of them. So this payment function has a lot of stuff going on. Well, it's really important that the students understand there is a quick way to do this, and there is a hard way to do this. And the way the exams are written, they're written to be done in 50 minutes. I expect some students will run out of time. It is a test of whether or not they know the best way to get to the answer. So being able to fill out this entire block right here can take forever if you don't understand effectively how relative and absolute references work. This will come back to haunt them at some point, right? They're going to have something like this. You don't have to tell them that it's going to be on the exam. I would prefer that you didn't. But it's very important that they understand the absolute versus mixed versus relative references and how they work within this table for effect, right? Not data table, but your regular table, so that they can figure out these formulas. More on this in a second. This says, please find the monthly payment and describe car and home loans. Additionally, please fill in the table showing what monthly payments would be based on changing borrowed amounts and interest rates. So we have interest rates changing here, borrowed amounts changing here, and show me the monthly payments in the middle. So we'll do that last. The first one is a 4-year car note of $35,000, 3.75 APR, annual percentage rate. So what's the monthly payment? Here, we want a payment function, which is PMT. And then when we open this, you're going to remind them of the arguments for a payment function. First argument for a payment function is rate. My rate is here. 3.75 is my interest rate. I know that that is an APR rate, so I must, to get a monthly payment, I must divide an annual rate by 12. So B8 divided by 12. There's no need to absolute reference it. I'm not going to drag it down. I'm not going to do anything. Well, I'm not going to drag it down. I am going to drag it across. But there's no need to absolute reference it because it's not being referenced by more than one cell. This 375 is not. It's only related to this one. The next argument, after I put the comma, the next argument Excel wants is number of payments. So number of payments is simply 48. I know it's simply 48, not 48 times 12, because it says right here terms in months. Guys, these are important things to point out. If this said payment term in years, the students would have to multiply that by 12 in order to get the same term. If everything's in months, it all needs to be in months, sort of thing. But here it's given to us in months, so we're okay with that. The next argument is present value. Remember to remind them that present value is the total amount minus the down payment. Here there is no down payment, so we don't have to worry about that, but remind them it is total amount minus down payment is the present value of a loan. Here, $35,000 because we don't have anything else. The last two arguments are optional. Fair value and type are optional. We'll not include them and take the default for both. When we click enter, we'll realize again that that is a negative 700 and something dollars. I want to put that negative sign out in front, and I get $786.36 is my amount borrowed on this car payment. That's a really big car payment. But we'll double click on it to make sure that we have the right thing. Payment in months. Interest rate divided by 12, that's correct. Amount borrowed, that's correct. So if I wanted to have this car under these terms, that's how I would do that. Now, since I didn't absolute reference anything in this column, I can simply drag this to the right to get this same mortgage payment. Double click on it to make sure it says 4% divided by 12, number of months, and the amount of the home loan, and realize that that is in fact my payment. So I can drag sideways. This is a great time to point this out to them again. And so, just want to point out they can drag that sideways or they can redo the payment amount. I don't really need you guys to cover this very slowly. They should be able to get the two of these on their own. What I'm worried about them being able to get is this. So, what happens in this table, this set of data that we're trying to work with, again, not data table, just set of data, we'll call it a table, is I want to be able to put in one formula, and then I want to be able to drag it to the right and drag it down and for it to accomplish everything that I need it to accomplish within this whole thing. I only want to enter one formula, because if I have to enter a different formula for each row or a different formula for each column, then that defeats the purpose of Excel. I want Excel to be easy, so I need to master these absolute and relative references in order to be able to do it. So this is how this one works. It's another payment function. And to start this payment function, we need to find the rate. So the rate is located, you'll see, in row 7. So here we have F7, and this is an annual rate. So we're going to assume this is an annual rate, and we're going to say, I always want to get my rate from row 7. So I need row 7 to be permanently fixed. So how do I get row 7 to be permanently fixed? Because if I'm over here in K, I don't want F7 to be fixed. I just want row 7 to be fixed. So I do that, not by function F5, sorry. How about function F4? I do that by putting a dollar sign in front of the 7. If I put a dollar sign in front of the 7, I am able to just freeze it on row 7. I don't care what column it's in. That's going to be relative to where I want my answer to be. But I do care that the rate is always going to come from row 7, so I do that. I would divide that by 12 because those are all annual interest rates. And then I'm going to go to number of payments. My number of payments, you can see by my comment that pops up here, number of monthly payments, number of months, is always going to be locked in this cell. So I need the number of payments to not change regardless. So I'll absolute reference, dollar signs in front of both, absolute reference that number of payments cell. My next argument is going to be present value. Well, the present value of my loan is always going to be in column E. It will vary as to the row, but it's always going to be in column E. So I need to make sure that I freeze just the column reference. So if I'm in cell if I'm down here, I still want, if I'm down in F15, I still want my present value to come from column E. But when I get over here, I don't want it to move out of column E. So I have to make sure that I freeze the column this time instead of the row. Hopefully that makes sense to you. We will ignore the last two arguments as they're optional. And we'll get negative 695, which again, we don't want. We want a positive. Remind them to always put that negative sign out in front of their payments. And then we can drag that down and drag it across and realize that magically all of our payments are calculated correctly. I'm going to highlight this, all of this table, go back and put my thick outside border around because it drives me crazy to not have it, but that's how you do that. And I want you to pick one random cell and double click on it to make sure that it is referencing the cells that you want within your payment function. So then, again, I can enter one formula, drag it both across and down, doesn't matter if I drag it down and then across or across and then down, it makes no difference. But want to be able to enter the formula once to be able to do that. So hopefully that makes sense. The last tab for Friday is going to be this commissions tab. The students can do this all on their own. They can just need to read the directions and work from there. Sales reps receive commissions based on whether or not they reach their sales goals. If reps achieve their goal, they receive a 7% commission. If they do not, they receive a 4% commission. Additionally, sales reps will receive a bonus commission of 2% if they've been employed for 10 years, regardless of whether the goal is met. Please calculate the total commission for each sales rep. Conditionally format all sales reps that receive more than $12,000 commission. Format the entire row in yellow fill. This looks an awful lot like an exam question, guys. This is how I ask questions in exam. So it's very important that you get to this during your lab. It's the last time that they have to review so that they'll know what to expect. But I want you to point them to the directions and let them work on this. I would like for you to start, again, by doing the data table and the payment function, and then turning them loose on the lookups and the commissions. That's what I want you to do. But I just want them to make sure they read the directions. So the first set of directions on goal-based commissions, it's an if statement that says if salespeople exceed their goal, so if their actual sales are greater than their goal, if that's true, they receive their actual sales times 7%. So they receive a 7% commission on their sales if they do better than their goal. If that's not true, they will receive their sales times 4%. So if their actual sales are bigger than their goal, they will receive their actual sales times 7%. If that's not true, they'll receive their actual sales times 4%. That's how you calculate that part of the if statement. The next part of the if statement is going to say if the logical test, if they've been employed for 10 years, So if, and they can do this a variety of ways, they can put the date on this worksheet somewhere, or they can just simply enter in today minus the hire date. So today minus the hire date is greater than or equal to 10. Let me back up a second because that's not right? If I do today minus the hire date, that's going to give me the number of days that they've worked there. I, in fact, need the number of years that they've worked there. So in parentheses, we'll put today minus the date they were hired divided by 365. If that's greater than or equal to 10, if that's true, they will receive their actual sales commission times 2%, so 0.02. So their total sales times 0.02, 2% commission. If that's false, they receive 0. So look down this list and look at the zeros and realize this person hasn't worked there 10 years, this person hasn't, this person has, so we're pretty confident in our tenure-based commission. We also are going to want to sum these two numbers together to get the total commission for each employee. So we're going to add those together. Now, could students do this plus this? Of course, right? I'm just using sum because it's Excel and it's fun. So the part of this that you might not know, and it's going to be a little different for you that when you're using a PC, the commands are just a little bit different. You probably can follow through this, but they're just a little different. But the last thing we want to do is conditionally format all the sales reps that receive more than $12,000 commission format the entire rows in yellow. So in order to do that, we have to select all of the columns, all of the data, right? So we select all of the columns, all of the data that we have, even though we're basing our conditional formatting just off of G. What I want you to notice is when I select all of these, my active cell is still in A1. That's going to be very important. My active cell is still in A1. So when I do this conditional formatting, that's going to matter. I'm going to go to conditional format. I'm going to go to new rule. Because none of the other options are going to work for me, I'm going to go to new rule. On a Mac, I have more options that I have to select. Here, I have to go in this style and say, I want the classic style. Give me the classic style formatting rule. Then in this next drop-down box, I'm going to say, use a formula to determine which cells to format. It's the last option if you're using a PC as well. So I'm just going to use a formula to determine which ones to format. And then I'm going to tell it my formula. Well, I want to know if G is greater than 10,000. So in this formula bar, I'm just going to click G1. And I'm clicking G1 because my active cell, remember, was A1. So I have to stay in the same row as A1. So right now I'm going to click in G1. And I'm going to say, I want you to actually measure column G. But I don't want you to stay in row 1. So I'm going to change my mixed referencing to lockdown G. This way it's going to stay in column G, but the row will move. That's my mixed referencing again. And I'm going to say if G1 is greater than 12,000. And it says that I want to format the entire row in a yellow fill. So to do that, I'll click on this format and say custom format. It's very similar on the Mac side. I'll go to fill and say background color yellow. So when I click OK, nothing's going to happen until I click OK again. And then all of a sudden, I will notice that all of my employees that have more than $12,000 in commission are highlighted in yellow. Notice that it says receive more than $12,000 in commission. So the $12,000 person is not highlighted because there was no equal to in my prompt. So if students were to turn in an exam, they would lose points if the $12,000 person was highlighted. They wouldn't lose all of the points, but they would lose points for the lack of logic. So you might want to point that out to them here. I also want to tell you that right now there is conditional formatting applied to this header row, and I want it to not be applied to the header row. There's no numbers in there. There's no reason for it to be highlighted. So I can go up here and I can change and tell it no fill. But if I do that, it's conditionally formatted. Nothing that I do at this point is going to change what this row is. I can't change it automatically. That's what tells me it's done by conditional formatting. So simply I'll highlight my headers, go up to conditional formatting, and I'm going to say clear rules from selected cells. Now it is highlighted blue because that's the last thing that I clicked on. I'll go back and hit no fill so it comes up and I can read it. That's all there is to the Friday lab, so I hope that this helped. I'm sorry on the delay. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks.